Okay, it's on, brother.
Well, welcome back. I'm surprised to see you. I thought maybe I mixed up enough people last night that it'd be a smaller crowd. We're in the book of Revelation. Excuse me. And the word means an unveiling, to take the cover off of. The Greek word apocalypsis, where we get the word apocalypse or apocalyptic language. And we kind of seen a little bit last night why John was getting this. And it happened while John was on the island of Patmos. And the island of Patmos is right off the Greek coast. It was a Roman Alcatraz. It was where the Romans exiled people to when they imprisoned them. And it was one of the islands they used for incarceration. So this is where John was at this time, in the latter part of Vespasian's rule. Excuse me. And there's and the reason we're kind of studying this is because of all the different beliefs and misunderstandings on this book. And you don't have to know everything about it. But if you look at the different views of it, one of them is the view that it's Jerusalem. But you can't get Jerusalem out of John's day, reigns over the kings of the earth and sits on 7 hills. That was Rome. That's all you can get out of that. And you can't get the view that some people say it's all of Israel because of the same reason. There's too much evidence that it's the Roman Empire, especially with what was fixing to happen with the rise of the Caesar Domitian, the Emperor Domitian. And then there's the view that's the most popular. It's the only view that you're going to hear on the radio or television. Anytime you turn on any kind of religious program that's talking about either Revelation or Daniel or 2 chapters in Ezekiel or Matthew chapter 24, there's a whole entire following of this is all in the Bible talking about the end of time. And they have a whole theology of it. And that's all you're going to hear on the radio and TV whenever you turn it on. And it is entertaining, I have to say. Otherwise I wouldn't have 20-something volumes of commentaries on it. But to me, it makes inroads of Christ's work. Because in that they say that Christ is going to return and set up a kingdom and reign for 1,000 years here on earth. And they take stuff out and say this is literal, and they take stuff out and say, okay, this is figurative, and okay, then we'll take this and that's literal. Well, then your story is going to depend on who's pulling out the literal and the figurative stuff, right? So, to say that Christ came down, died on the cross like he planned, he was going to set up his kingdom then, but since they crucified him and rejected him, he started up the church, and he's going to come back, and then he's going to set up his kingdom. Well, that kind of demeans to me the importance that Christ feels about his church. If Christ calls his church, which in Revelation John calls it the kingdom, if Christ calls his church his bride, what's supposed to be the most important thing to you in your whole entire life, men? You better get this answer right. Amen. If that's the most important thing to you on earth or in the universe, why would you come back and set up a kingdom when you already have a bride? And the other thing I can't figure out is this torment and persecution and torture that the church was fixing to have. And Paul even mentions some of it. I didn't spend very much time yesterday. We kind of talked about Nero soaking Christians in fats of oil and using them as lamppost lights. There's so much grotesque stuff that I could spend an hour telling you about that I've read about in history. Paul mentions some of it in one of his letters, remember? Some of us were sawed in two. And it's like sawed in two, and he means while you were still alive. Some of us were run through with the spear. Some of us were killed by the sword. Paul mentions a whole lot of them in one of his epistles. That was the persecution that was going on in the first century. And so John's getting this vision because the persecution under Nero, at the death of Nero, it ended because of civil war in Rome. And Vespasian, who didn't care about whatever you want to worship, whatever God you want to worship, was fine with him. But at the rise of Domitian, the persecution of Christians began again. And not only was it a persecution of Christians, Domitian thought he was God. To address Domitian, you had to say, Most Holy God Domitian. To enter his throne room, you had to say, May I approach your divine couch, Most Holy God Domitian. When he entered into the arena for the games or anything, he had to be introduced as, Now our Emperor Caesar Domitian, Most Holy God. And then all throughout the Roman Empire, in the temples and the false religion that the Romans had a whole entire false religion of all these gods that they had that you've read in Greek mythology that carried over into the Roman Empire. They also had the embodiment of the empire had to be worshipped. And Domitian had it so that all over the empire you had to pinch some incense and throw it into a fire in one of the temples and proclaim Caesar Domitian as God. And for a Christian, you couldn't hold your fingers behind your back and say, well, this don't mean nothing, and do that. Just as we wouldn't be able to do that today. And so this persecution was fixing to come up, and this was a guy who was, in a couple of years, was going to be rose up as the next Caesar. And this whole book John is getting is a revealing of what is fixing to come about on the church. And so all these views, I was listening to Jim McGuigan one time, and I've talked with many people about the book of Revelation, and they've got all these views about, well, look in our time right now. That's this. And look in our time right now. That's this in this chapter. And the seven-headed beast, the 10 horns, is United Nations. We have, and there's a whole story for it. But you can take any particular time in history and now and the future and draw up a story that will fit. One time I was listening to Jim McGuigan, and he had this article. He had a magazine. He started reading in it. And in the one section was a sports section, and there was this 2 brawlers fighting in a match. And one was projected to win, and they thought, okay, this guy's going to win. And he was reading this article, and it ended up that the other guy just beat the brains out of that guy in this match. So the underdog was just beat him half to death, and they finally had to pull him off of him. And it's like, well, I've seen some boxing matches and some of our cage fighting now that I don't like to watch much because it just seems too brutal to me. And then he turned the page and got over into the government section, and he said, he started reading about it, how Russia was doing this. And Russia was doing that, and it's like, wow, I guess he probably just got that last week. And he flipped it over and he held it up and he says October Weekly, 1857. So you can take any part of history and apply it to the book of Revelation, and you can get out of there lessons to learn about what to see. But what we want to know is, what is the book of Revelation really talking about? Because we don't want a false religion and to teach false doctrine. What did it mean when it was written? And so that's what we're studying this weekend. And we did say that the book of Revelation was written in apocalyptic speech, which is kind of what the word means. And I may not understand all apocalyptic speech, but I can recognize that stuff. Just every time I can see it. You know, I read a text here and all of a sudden it's something I don't understand. It's way above my head and I think that's apocalyptic right now. And anybody who can't tell the difference in apocalyptic speech or ordinary speech can't tell the difference in Daniel chapter 1 and Daniel chapter 7. And a fellow who can't tell the difference between Daniel 1 and 7 doesn't need to be in this class, right? And if I can't tell the difference between Ezekiel chapter 1 and Daniel chapter and John chapter 2, then I'm in trouble. So we might not always understand apocalyptic speech, we all recognize that it exists. And I didn't write this stuff, so don't blame me, right? God wrote it. And we say, well, I wish you'd have written it more plainly. Well, I understand that because Daniel often said, what on earth does that mean? And he ends his chapter many times saying, my spirits are troubled within me. He thought he had troubles. He should be where we are, right? But the Lord wrote it in apocalyptic speech, so he did it. And ultimately, he's responsible. He knows what he's doing. You and I are supposed to take the time to look at these things. Apocalyptic speech is figurative. We got to recognize that. So in reading the book of Revelation, what we do is we read it and we say, that's what we're seeing in a vision. What does it mean? You don't read it and say, that's what it means. You read it and you say, that's what he saw. But what does it mean? Nobody in his right mind reads about that big red dragon in chapter 12, whose tail's so big it wipes out a third of the stars in the heavens. Nobody reads that and says that's what it means. Because how can his tail wipe out a third of the stars if the stars are infinite? And if you try to grasp the reality and the literalism of it, you can't. Because it's figurative. It's just teaching a lesson that he's huge. And then we say, but what on earth does it mean? So we know that what we're seeing is not the lesson. We draw from the picture the lesson. That's what one's supposed to do to approach the book of Revelation. But I know there's some literal truths in there, and there are literal terms and literal explanations. And a lot of times the angel talking to John says, this is literal. Here's the mind that has wisdom. I'm going to let your mind know what this one means. And he interprets it for him. But generally, it's all apocalyptic. We need to be consistent, remember we mentioned last night. We'll go all the way through there, the book, chapter 4 to 20, and about verse 10, and we've got all that all figurative all the way through. Then we get to 20, verse 11, and to the end we immediately literalize because we finally got to some place we can actually grasp it as literal. And so our minds change to it. Then we go to chapter 21 and we figurize again. We literalize and figurize when we want. So you've got to help me to be consistent when you're studying this. It looks just as good on me as it does on anybody else. And all these commentary writers and people on TV that are always consistent, and we're yelling at them, be consistent. Well, we have to be consistent too. So, we talked about Revelation having a time frame, remember. John says the time is at hand and shortly come to pass. He says it twice at the beginning of the book, twice at the end of the book, and I get the very definite impression that what John wrote about was things shortly to come to pass, and the time was at hand. Now, I don't mind a fellow snowing me. I don't mind him setting forth a view I can't explain or anything like that, but he starts talking to me about these 3 frogs, or the 7 thunders, or the 7-headed beast with the 10 horns, or the prostitute who sits there drinking all the blood and wants me to accept everything he's telling to me, and then ignores these ordinary plain statements. I have to worry about his ability to get a hold of the apocalyptic sections if he can't agree with me on the prose sections. Sometimes you can tell what a thing doesn't teach, though you can't tell what it does teach. 2 fellows are in discussion. This fellow sets forth a view. The other fellow says, that's not true, and it couldn't be true. And he gives them about 10 reasons why he knew it wasn't true. And the guy says to him, I think you're right. I think I've held the wrong view on the matter. What does it mean? And the guy says to him, I don't know. I know it just doesn't mean what you're saying. But that's not too good, is it? But it's something. And the fellow says to him, well, don't be dumb. If you don't know what it means, how do you know it doesn't mean what I've been saying it means? So the 2 guys are standing on the street corner, and this real ugly-looking woman walks down the far side of the street. She looked like Godzilla. And the guy says to him, hey, there's your wife going down the street. And the guy turns around and just gets a glimpse of her, and he goes, that's not my wife. And he says, well, then who is it? He goes, I don't know. He goes, well, if you don't know who it is, how do you know it's not your wife? See, you don't have to know everything to know that something's not true. And anyway, that's what we've been saying. Anybody who ignores the time references given to it.
I was just going to ask, I was out for a moment, but did you have a chance to tell everyone at all what the purpose was of apocalyptic speech? Like, why is part of the Bible written in ordinary and other parts apocalyptic? Is there a purpose in that?
No. I'll have to let my dad answer that one.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people say apocalyptic speech was written to hide the truth from the enemy. If an 8th grade education Roman soldier read chapter 17 about a nation who persecutes saints, about a nation that sits on 7 hills, and about a nation who in John's day rules over the kings of the earth, that's not very good hiding. That's a pretty easy code to crack. Now, I might not know why God chose to write an apocalyptic speech, but the view to hide the truth from the enemy, it's like, man, anybody could have figured that out. It's not a very good hiding. So that's one thing I'll have to ask God. There are many views, and I could give you about 10 or 15 of them, but I'm not going to take the time to do that. Okay. Anybody who treats the book of Revelation in such a way as to ignore the time references. In chapter 1, verse 7, it says the Lord's going to come. In chapter 22, 4 times. He tells John, I'm coming soon. That's 1900 to 2,000 years ago. I believe I'd look at that coming in light of the connection to the book of Revelation then. Anybody that anyway, then what we did is we took a look at the book, we discussed a few of the views. But anybody that you see on TV, like I was saying earlier, or listen to on the radio, I've only heard one view on the radio or TV. I have to buy a commentary to get a different view because the one of the futuristic is so prevalent. So, we need to know something about it. because I'm always digging for the truth. Okay. And last night we went through into the book, and we took certain major elements out of it just so I could build a little bit of a foundation for you today. And we mentioned when we were closing the seven-headed monster that was in chapter 13. And we went to Revelation chapter 11 and verse 7, where we talked about the beast coming up out of the abyss and slew the brethren in the great city, which is called Egypt, Sodom, and Jerusalem. All three names it wears. Now, what city is that? It's the city of Rome that ruled the world in John's day. And the thrust of the book of Revelation is this: you are about to come into conflict with Rome. You'll win it. For I'll beat the fire out of that kingdom, God is telling them. And I will establish public testimony that I, Jesus Christ, am the King of kings and Lord of lords. There's the central thrust of the book of Revelation. It has two elements in it, we mentioned. One element is historical events. The historical events of Revelation have been fulfilled. The other element is timeless truths, we mentioned. That doesn't apply to any particular moment in history. They're always true. God always wins. Saints are always victorious, and on, you see. So, some of the truths, the major timeless truths in the book of Revelation, are still applicable to today. If the Lord gives this world 10,000 years more, they'll still be true. The timeless truths of Revelation are still binding today. Now the question is whether the historical events prophesied in the book of Revelation have been completed or not. I kind of take a different view on it. I think the events have been fulfilled, and there's not a very much of a percentage of people who believe that. Of all the commentaries, 100 to 1 is written. One of them is written. That's what it is. I believe it's written in chapter 17, verse 9 and following, in the later days of the Emperor Vespasian. He ruled in 69 to 79, and toward the end of his rule, John got this vision of the book of Revelation. But he was on the island of Patmos, out on the water, when he got it, and by the time it circulated among the brethren, Domitian would already be ruling. For Titus, the son of Vespasian, its successor, only ruled 2 years, 2 months, and 20 days. That's what the text says. One is yet to come, and when he comes, he'll stick around only a little while. So, what we'll do right now, we'll go through the book. If you'll get your text open, we'll go briefly through the book and try to hang the whole thing together. and this afternoon, we'll try to spend all our time on Armageddon, the 1,000-year rule, the first resurrection, the rest of the dead, and what's the picture of 21 and 22, okay? But let's go quickly to Revelation, and we'll try just to fly on through there. So let's start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 is introductory. It's an introduction to the book. And it's an exciting book. In chapter 1, we're told specifically that it comes from the Godhead in verse 4 and following. John makes it very clear in verse 9 that he's in the kingdom. Any doctrine that teaches that the kingdom was not established at the time that the book of Revelation was written is not of God. For John says, I'm having troubles like you are in tribulation. I am in the kingdom of Jesus Christ. So there's no question about it. At the time the book of Revelation was written, the kingdom was already established. That means the story that you hear from all the different writers that Jesus is going to come back and establish his kingdom is not biblical. John says, I'm in it. All right, so he hears someone talking to him. He turns around in verse 12 and following, and he sees Jesus Christ apocalyptically described. He's wearing the gold of royalty, the white of nobility and purity. His feet are of brass, which he could stomp things and stamp things with and crush them with. His eyes, he sees his eyes, he sees they're burning, and he's telling John all told 3 times in chapter 1, 2 times in chapter 1, I want this written down. I want this written. He tells him, your God and mine intended for us to have a book revelation. There are those who say that the book was an accident. God intended you and me to have a book revelation. He said, write this down. Start right from the beginning. So then, there's chapter 1. What have we learned from it? From whom the letter came, to whom the letter came. 7 churches. Then in chapters 2 and 3, we have an assessment of the 7 churches of Asia. And each of the letters, here's their structure. There's commendation, then there's condemnation, then there's a call to repentance. That's the general rule of it. The Ephesian church, the first one there, were tough debaters. They were sound as a brand new silver dollar. But they had lost their first love. And we can quote scriptures and we can get it all right and we can stand up here and know so much about this and so much about that. And be good debaters. And all of a sudden realize you're really not in the heart of the Lord Jesus. We can get so involved with work and knowledge and not have that relationship if you're not careful. And this is what had happened to the Ephesian church. And he says to them, let's see where it was. So there's got to be that happy medium, that blend of doctrine and our emotional involvement with the Lord. But these dudes here had lost that involvement with Jesus. They were good at quoting scriptures and splitting hairs and all that sort of stuff. But they had lost that first love that you can read about back in Acts when Paul was there on a missionary journey. And the Smyrnian church, they were a top-notch bunch of people. Verse 9 says, I know your tribulation. That's a nice piece right there, isn't it? Jesus saying that. Haven't you ever gone to somebody and you're really hurt and sore, and you say to him, here's my problem. And he says to him, yeah, I know. And you say that, well, somebody's turned on me, and he says to you again, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And all the while he's nodding, and and you know he understands what you're saying. And it really builds up a rapport between you and that person. When all the while he's nodding and you're happy to see that he's not looking at his watch or seeing how long you're going to take of his time or waving at somebody while you're pouring your heart out to him. The Lord Jesus here says to these Smyrnians, I know what you're going through. I know what you're going through. I'm glad of that, aren't you? And then he talks to these Pergamons. Well, anyway, there's something about all these churches that are worthwhile. If you'll notice down in verse 17, he promises them who overcomes a white stone and a new name. These people, if you overcome this Roman persecution, a white stone and a new name. A new name is a new status. Abram becomes who? Abraham. Sarai becomes Sarah. Simon becomes Peter. Jacob becomes Israel. Saul becomes Paul. A new name speaks of a new status, a new relationship. Through tribulation and trial, They will enter into a new relationship with the Lord. Ooh, what a text. And the white stone. There's a lot of good history here. The white stone, when they voted a fellow innocent, they threw a white stone into the iron, acquitted him. And also the fellow that won at the Olympic Games would get a white stone if he was a winner at one of the games. And that would let him into all the games free, and he gets an honored seat and everything. There's all kinds of Roman history there in that white stone. Anyway, that's all those things are something like that go through chapter 3. So chapters 2 and 3 then have within them an assessment of the churches in Asia. And of course, there's nothing wrong with you and me understanding the number 7 being the perfect number, and that spoke about the troubles of the church all over the empire then, and all over the world. But the 7 were used because of the number. And they apply equally to us today, don't they? So, chapters 4 and 5, listen to this, 4 and 5 go together. And they are the beginning of the apocalyptic sections proper. Why is chapter 4 and 5 where they are? Why are chapters 4 and 5 right at the beginning? It's important to have them there because he's going to give them bad news in the chapters following. So what he does then, he needs to tell them. He needs to get them ready for what he's about to tell them. For what does he say in chapters 4 and 5? In chapter 4 he says, God is creator. In chapter 5 he says, God is a lover. In chapter 4 he talks of God's power to rule. In chapter 5 he talks of God's redeeming activity. So chapters 4 and 5 are well summed up in this one verse. In John 14:1, the Bible says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Chapter 4 says, believe in God. Chapter 5 says, believe also in me. When you read in chapter 4 and verse 1, he says, I saw a door open in heaven. And I'm glad of that. It wasn't a window. It was a door. You don't go in through windows. You go in through doors. Heaven's open to you and me. And it wasn't a locked or barred door. It was open. Thank God for that. And he looks inside. He goes up and he goes inside and he sees a throne. The throne is where? It's not in Italy. It's not in Rome. The throne that rules the world is where ordinary people can't see it. People of the world, people in Hollywood, politicians never see this. People in the world never get a vision of heaven. And all of a sudden, suddenly when you look up, you see the heavens open. And John says, I saw where the throne was that ruled the world. And you know what John's saying and telling the brethren in chapter 4? The one who rules the world doesn't sit in Italy. I don't care what those dudes over there say. I don't care what Domitian will finally claim. I am God. Our kingdom's eternal, and I'll beat the fire to you to prove it. He's saying, don't you worry a thing about that. The throne that rules the world is in heaven. And he goes on to talk about God in a very remarkable way. There is combined in chapter 4 two major elements in chapter 4. There's royalty and there's priesthood. There's a big sea separating between the throne and the people around it. It's a priestly scene. It's borrowed from Solomon's temple. Solomon had a brazen sea that you had to wash at before you could get near God. And this acts here as the laver that stands between the brethren here and God. And the 24 elders, I'm asserting all this, you know that. I don't have the time to talk about them. The 24 elders represent the church of God. In the Old Testament, David divided the priesthood into 24 orders to do his work, to do the work around about the tabernacle. These fellows here are priests who are wearing overcomers' crowns, you see. And they represent the church of God. Well, on and on in chapter 4, there's good stuff in there. Chapter 4 says God's the ruler and God's the creator. In chapter 5, we see God as a lover and a redeemer. We go to chapter 5, and the one sitting on the throne, he's got a scroll in his hand. It's all sealed up. John wants to know what's in there. The little book represents God's will for the church in the immediate future, you see. And that needs to be revealed, and John wants to know it. But they search the heavens, and there's no angel up there strong enough, powerful enough to do it. They search the earth, and there's nobody there. They go under the earth, fellows like Abraham, where he'd been buried, that is, and all the prophets who had been buried in the earth, and there's nobody there that was powerful enough to do it. And John starts to cry, and the fellow just says to him, "Quit your crying." That's good news right there, isn't it? Quit your crying. He said, "The Lion of the tribe of Judah has overcome." And he takes the book and he opens the seals thereof, and he looks and he doesn't see a lion at all. He sees a lamb that has been killed, that is living again. And you know what it says? It says he saw it. I saw in the midst of the throne, and in the midst of the elders, and in the midst of the four living creatures, a lamb. Do you know what's at the heart of the throne of our universe? Surrendered deity. Someone who didn't just talk about loving you and me, but who lowered himself to show us at the heart of our universe a slain lamb that has come to life again. That's all in chapters 4 and 5. Now in chapter 6 then deals with 6 of the seals. All of a sudden we get into the seals. Seals were to keep a thing closed and to keep anybody from messing with it. The ripping off of a seal reveals. And so he begins to rip off the seals, and one more time, as he does throughout the book, he comforts them and prepares them. What's the first thing he sees when he rips off the first seal? Out comes Jesus Christ. There's only one other horse in the book that is white, that is singled out. Do you hear me? That is white, that is singled out. There's only one white horse in the book that's singled out, chapter 19, and that's the one Jesus rides on. In chapter 19, when he leads the brethren, chapter 19, verse 19, it says that the 2 beasts and the dragon in the world want to fight against him that sitteth upon the horse. There's only one white horse that's singled out in the book, and it's specific color white. And Jesus rules on it. White in the book of Revelation always speaks of something pure. It's never used of anything evil. It occurs 16 times, and every time it occurs, it deals with something pure. I know this cannot be the Antichrist, and there's a crucial point in all of everyone's understanding. The dude in the white horse is the Antichrist, they tell us. He's Jesus Christ, who's the conqueror who conquers. He has on his head, he wears on his head the Stephanos, the crown of a conqueror. And what is the history behind this white horse coming out? There's a little bit of something that it meant to the first century Christians that it really doesn't mean to anything to us today. Back in the first century, when Rome was conquering the whole world, there was one group of people that they just couldn't seem to whip. And they were the Parthians. No matter what happened, they just couldn't seem to be able to whip the Parthians. And archaeologists have found coins of this picture here of a Parthian warrior on it. The Parthian warrior is sitting on a horse with a bow in his hand. and a crown on his head. What's the significance in that when the first century Christians saw that? So Rome then, they were the ones that the Romans were most scared of. They had whipped everybody else, but they just couldn't have whipped these Parthians. And the Parthians really gave Rome fits, and they whipped up on them. They whipped them up when Mark Antony went up against them in a long drawn-out battle concerning the Battle of Samosata. But they really did a good job, the Parthians did on the Romans, on a job with being run by Crassus. And he was kind of the Al Capone of the Roman Republic. And at that battle, at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC that Crassus led, the Parthians slew 40,000 Roman soldiers and took 20,000 of them captive. And nobody in Rome ever forgot that. And so the Parthians were the only ones that really could do a number on the Romans. So if you wanted to spook Rome, all of you just went out in the street and yelled, "Parthians!" And that really got their attention. So he describes Jesus Christ, the Messiah, coming in, the conqueror of God's people. He describes the Lord as a Parthian warrior. So that meant something to the first century Christians then. Because as soon as they saw this white horse coming out, wearing a crown on his head and a bow, that was one of the Parthians' coins. They knew that represented a Parthian warrior, and they knew, well, the Romans ain't going to be able to whip him. So that's just a little bit of history tidbit in there. But so what's he saying, man? He says, "Gentlemen, whatever you see after this, I want you to know. He's in control. He's the winner. He leads only triumphant armies." Then in quick succession, in verse 3 through 8, he has the second, third, and fourth seals. And of course, the four horsemen. I have a big, huge plaque that some of you have seen in my the four horsemen of Revelation chapter 6. And when I was a teenager, me and a bunch of my buddies were in one of these goofy stores, it's called Spencer's or something like that had all the funky far out stuff. I wasn't really into it. They were, and they made me go. So,
Yeah.
So I'm thumbing through all these posters, and we're looking at them like you can still kind of do. And all of a sudden, I thumbed through one, and it was the four horsemen. It looks kind of like this picture, but it's not that exact one. And they're like, "Wow, that's pretty cool. Look at that painting." And I'm like, "Yeah." They didn't know what it was. And I go, "That's the four horsemen of Revelation chapter 6. And they're like, "The what?" Because I didn't run around with the right people. So, and I've got that. A buddy of mine talked me into, let's fix this thing up. So we got a big piece of plywood, and we burnt the ends so it'd be all black and burnt on the ends. And we took a lighter and burnt the edges of the posters, and we shellacked the whole thing. You have to see it. Anyway, I don't know why I spent time on that. Mark this scripture down. Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 21. It's helpful here. There are four sore judgments of God which he pours out on the earth. They are the sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beast. Ezekiel 14, the whole chapter really, but 14:21 in particular, speaks of the four sore judgments of God which descends on the earth. And seals 2, 3, and 4 tell the brethren that there's about to fall on the earth all kinds of troubles. Wars, persecutions, disease, hurt of one kind or another. And all you have to do is glance through some history, and you'll find that that's the case during the Roman Empire. Well, anyway, that's what he says. And then in verse 9, the fifth seal talks about the persecuted brethren. And they want to know, they're underneath the altar in heaven, they want to know, "Lord, when are we going to be vindicated?" And he says to them, "Take your time. I'll handle it." That's the fifth seal. He doesn't tell them when it's going to happen. He just says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And one thing that's always amazed me about that one passage is when they asked him that, they cried out with a loud voice, how long, O Lord, holy and true, chapter 6, verse 10, wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood? Because these people went through the persecution and died for it. And they're in heaven saying, Lord, when are you going to vindicate us, and those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed even as they had been should be completed. They're told that until the number, God tells them, until the number that died the way you have is reached, that I have. And you think about that, doesn't that sound kind of morbid? God has a number of how many people, and if you read back in Roman history, about 500,000 roughly Christians were martyred under the Roman Empire, 500,000. And these people are asking, Lord, how long are you going to let this be? And God says, until the ones that died like you, I have a number, until that many is reached. And it's like, why does... And you think, well, how can the Lord let this just happen? That's what we think about through our human eyes. If the Lord has a following, like the first century, and 500,000 of them are martyred in His name because they love Him so much, why would He not want 500,000 of them with Him round about the throne right away? There is a verse in Proverbs, I think it is, that says, let me see how wonderful it is in the sight of the Lord at the death of His saints. Don't that sound kind of morbid to you? From our side of the coin, it sounds like that, doesn't it? But what are these Christians going to receive as soon as they go through their tribulation and die? You're going to be in heaven around about the throne. It's too bad that we can't spend one day on earth, spend one day in heaven, be sent back to earth and say, okay, which one do you want to pick? Because there wouldn't be none of us left here, right? So they want to know, when are we going to be vindicated? And the Lord says, don't worry about it. I got a number that I want reached. I have a number of you that I want up here right away. So, and then under the sixth seal, an answer to the prayers. An answer to the prayers, though it's not fulfilled at this point, of course, there is an outpouring of terrible judgment on the ungodly. Now, the judgment is on the world, you understand, but when God's judgments are in the earth, very often the innocent have to suffer with the guilty. You know that's right. The innocent often suffer with the guilty. And Ezekiel 21, 3 and 4 tells that very thing. The Lord's going to pour out all kinds of troubles on the earth, and the saints are going to be hurt, along with the ungodly. But just the same, and here's a crucial issue in the book of Revelation, just the same, in spite of the fact that the saints are hurt, they are not being punished by God. They are the innocent suffering with the guilty. And you know that's always right. That happens today in everything. I usually tell about this story when I was in grade school. We came in from recess one day, and there's 25 of us, and the teacher wasn't in the class yet. And everybody was hooting and hollering and playing still and going crazy except for me. I was the only one that got in my chair and pulled out my textbook and was preparing for what the teacher wanted to say, quietly. And when the teacher came in and seen nothing but chaos, guess what? Every one of us had to stay in it for recess the next time. I was the innocent having to suffer with the guilty. There's your little example. It might not be true, but there's your example. So chapter 6 ends with this question. Chapter 6 ends with this question. Who is able to stand against the wrath of the Lamb? Now, we've read over that so many times, we've forgotten what it says there. Have you ever seen an angry lamb? Has anybody ever seen an angry lamb? That's a spooky old expression, isn't it? Can you imagine how you'd feel if you saw a lamb getting mad? Wouldn't that kind of scare the fire out of you? You'd think something strange here going on. This lamb gets mad. There are those who believe the Lord doesn't get mad. You know that's not right. Somebody had a bumper sticker one time that said, "Hey, God isn't dead at all. Man, is he mad?" I see a point right there. There's a lot of ungodliness in the world. Jesus is coming is the good news. The bad news is he's angry because of all the ungodliness. So they want to know who's going to be able to stand. The end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 answers the question that ends chapter 6. Who's able to stand? Chapter 7 tells you the church of God. The 144,000 apocalyptic word number is 12 by the power of 12, 12 times 12 raised to the 1,000th degree. That's just perfecting the thought of the completeness, the 1,000th of completeness of God's people. 12 is the number of God's people in apocalyptic speech because you have the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes, the 12 patriarchs, and all that kind of stuff. Always means God's people in apocalyptic speech, 12. And the 1,000 means it's total and complete. So anyway, chapters 7, 1 through 8 talks about the sealing of them. And verse 9 through 17 shows that it works. You know what's an interesting study that I wish you'd get in on if you get a chance? 9 through 17 describes the scene of the Feast of Tabernacle terms. That's what he's describing in 9 through 17. If you ever read anything on the Feast of Tabernacles, you know of the one thing that happened is that everybody was ecstatically happy. They had them a Jewish Mardi Gras at Feast of Tabernacles. You know, they really did. They'd all dress in bright white clothing and bright colors, and they'd build their booths on the top of the houses. If they couldn't do that, they'd build them in the streets, and they all lived out in the open air, and they all sang those hallowed songs, and they all sang the real good songs of God bringing them salvation, and all that sort of stuff. And they would get water. They'd get water from the pool of Siloam, and they'd walk up and pour it around about the altar and remind them of the water that was given in the days of Moses, and all that sort of stuff you see. And Christ here leads them to living waters and gives them to drink. And all that good stuff, you know, and everybody's happy. And they've all got their palm branches, and they've all come through the tribulation. And the fact that the seal works is proven by the fact that here are innumerable hosts, and they're all going crazy with joy. At the Feast of Tabernacles, in the book of John chapter 7, on the final day of the feast, Jesus stood up and said, "He that believeth in me, out of his belly will flow rivers of living water." In the book of John, in the Gospel of John, John determines the show. Everything Moses did, Christ does better. In the book of John, John 1, Moses built the altar, or the tabernacle. And John 1, Jesus is the tabernacle. In John chapter 2, in Moses' day, his first public miracle was turning water to blood. Christ's first public miracle was turning water to wine. There was a whole difference between law and grace, you see. And then Moses walked through water. Jesus walks on it. Moses gives him water out of a rock, and Jesus says, I'll let you be your own fountain. Moses gives them manna, and they eat of it and still die. Jesus says, I am the manna. Eat of me, and you'll live forever. So, all the way through the book of John, that's exactly what he does. Anyway, he does this here in chapter 7. He shows the tabernacle scene and how enjoyable it is for everybody. Then in chapter 8, you have the seventh seal. Now the seventh seal has under it like 7 sub-points, the 7 trumpets. The trumpets are warning judgments. Chapters 8 and 9 go together. You know all you have to do to keep in mind, get a hold of chapters 8 and 9? Do this. Think about the plagues on Egypt. Think about what they were for. And you'll understand the trumpets. The plagues on Egypt were on the oppressors of God's people, saying, leave them alone and let them go free. Let them be. And if you read through these, you'll read about hail falling. You'll read about water turning to blood in chapters 8 and 9. You'll read about an electric storm that was involved with the hailstone storm if you read Exodus carefully. The burning up of everything. You'll read about the stars being blackened out and all that being blackened out, the sun not shining, where people couldn't move around for several days. And all this you'll see in chapters 8 and 9. To get a hold of chapters 8 and 9, think to yourselves. Forget the details for the moment. Think to yourself the plagues on Egypt. There's locusts and there's blood, and there's a blacking out of everything. God says, I'm doing to Rome. This is the overall picture. God is doing to Rome what he did to Egypt. Now these are not all intended to be literally understood, of course. These are figures of speech. You see a portrait hanging on a wall, and you step back and you look at it. But rarely does anybody walk up and try to figure out the paint, the brush strokes in it. You don't do that to a picture. You don't walk up and see where the paint is marred by the hairs of the brush. You step back and you look at the whole thing and you get the whole picture. That's what you're supposed to do with chapters 8 and 9. Those are the trumpets. And then if you'll notice in chapter 9, verse 1, he sees a star fallen from heaven, fallen to the earth, and he's got the key of the abyss. Remember when we said last night that everything good in the book of Revelation has an evil counterpart? Well, here's one right here. In chapter 22, verse 16, Jesus said, I am the bright and morning star. I have the key of death and Hades. Here's a fallen star that has a key of the abyss. This is the devil himself. He's called Apollyon and Abaddon down in verse 11. Now these locusts that come up out of this blackness, there again you have the plagues on Egypt that darken out the air and all the smoke that's there. There's moral decadence. Moral decadence that eats the heart out of a nation, torments it, doesn't kill it necessarily, doesn't kill it stone dead, but they die just the same, don't they? These locusts that fill the air with this black darkness and torment is moral decadence. The falling of morality in your country. I'm glad that's not happening here in the United States. Then in 13 through 21 of chapter 9, it talks about external invasion. External invasion. What are we hearing then in all these trumpets? What are we hearing? God is saying, I want your attention, Rome. I want you to repent. And if you don't, I'm going to beat your brains in. So he's bringing all these in. He's bringing all these trumpets in. And they won't repent. Look at verse 20 of chapter 9. And the rest of mankind who weren't killed by these plagues didn't repent, you see. And then again in verse 21, it says they didn't repent. Now what he'll do then is, he'll take chapters 10, 11, and 12 to comfort the brethren. For anybody who won't repent of that is a bad enemy. And that scares the brethren, you see, because they won't repent unto that. Even in Moses' day, Pharaoh let him go. Of course, then he reneged on his decision and went after him, but he finally gave in. But under Rome, they never gave in. They wouldn't repent. So he takes 10 through 12, chapters 10 through 12, he essentially says, he takes 10 through 12, they all go together, 10 through 12, chapters 10 through 12 for comfort. In chapter 10, he essentially says, in verse 6, last phrase, there will be delay no longer. He says, all right, you're in for it. You won't repent, so therefore you're going to get it. Chapter 11 does two things. The first part of it describes a holy city. The word temple is the word there that speaks of the inner sanctuary. You see, the holy city, it's the church of God. In the vision, the inner sanctuary there, word is used. There are two words in the Greek for temple. One means the temple as a whole, the hieron. The other is the naos, the inner sanctuary. The inner sanctuary is used here, in view here. He sees the holy city. It's Jerusalem in the vision, of course. But he sees the holy city, which stands for the church of God, and it's going to be trodden on and beaten and battered. However, he has the inner sanctuary measured, and it's not to be touched. It won't be touched. So what do you see in the vision then? He says, gentlemen, you're in for a hard time, but I want you to know I'll sustain you through it all. There's the story. That's the times and a half a time. And then he talks about the two witnesses in verse 3 and following. Who are these two witnesses? They're also another symbol of the church of God in the vision. It says in verse 4 that these two witnesses are two olive trees. Now, if you go to Zechariah chapter 4, and I'm deadly serious, it's a simple and straightforward point here. In Zechariah 4, you'll find out that the two olive trees are here. They are Zerubbabel, the civil leader, the royal of the royal line, and Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. The two olive trees represent the royalty, which was Zerubbabel, the priesthood, which was Joshua. So these two olive trees here are the royal priesthood that we already seen in chapter 4, remember? The number 2 in the Bible, there's two of them. The number 2 in the Bible is a number of strength and testimony. You know how Jesus said, go out 2 by 2. How Paul said, against an elder, don't receive an accusation except at the mouth of at least 2 or 3 witnesses. How in Matthew 18 he said, go see your brother if you're in trouble. If he won't listen to you, take a couple of witnesses that it might all be established. How in the book of Genesis chapter 42, and that the Lord says to Joseph and to Pharaoh, and that he doubled the dream. That means the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. The number 2 in the Bible is the number of strong testimony. And what's he saying then here in chapter 11? He's saying, gentlemen, you're going to have a hard time. You'll have to wear sackcloth. You see, he said you'll have a hard time, but nobody will be able to stop you. You'll be able to do the job, but you won't be able to be stopped. And what looks like victory of the beast over the brethren, of the Roman Empire over the brethren, killing them left and right and torturing them, isn't really victory at all. Well, in our eyes, it sure looks like they're winning, doesn't it? But God doesn't see them winning. He sees himself winning, because every time they kill one, they get to live with him. And then it says they lie there for 3.5 days, and then they're taken up into heaven. The vindication of God's people is in view here, by them being taken up into heaven after they preached and stayed loyal to him all the way till death. So in chapter 12 then, here's a super text. Chapter 12 then tells them that the devil is a 3-time loser. Because remember, chapters 10 through 12 is still the pep rally. Because at the end of chapter 9, they wouldn't repent. Chapters 10 through 12 is a pep rally for the brethren. And chapter 12 is a super text. Chapter 12, here's a big red dragon. And here stands a woman, pregnant, ready to give birth. Now, I guess that'd probably be about the only kind of person that would be able to go against something that big and mean, right? Some of you women might understand. But this says here, the devil loses against a pregnant woman and her baby. That's loss number 1. The baby's taken up into heaven. What is the church of God being told? You people in time past have beaten the fire out of the devil. Your Lord has beaten the devil. Then in verse 7 through 12, the dragon goes up into heaven. And up in heaven, Michael the archangel beats the brains out of him up there. And then he gets thrown down to the earth. He's mad. He can't beat the woman. He can't beat the child either. Couldn't get the baby. He can't beat that Michael the archangel. And so he turns on the seed of the woman. And the woman is the people of God as a whole. And out of the people of God, a baby was born. Story sound familiar? And the woman, so the woman is the people of God as a corporate whole, and her seed. And this is so usual in the Old Testament. Check it with the concordance. The seed of the woman are the individual saints. He can't whip the church of God as a whole. He can't beat the Lord. He can't beat the angel. He turns on the individual Christians, and he pours out of his mouth like a flood, notice, water to destroy them. But then the earth swallows it up. Now the background of it all is Old Testament Israel's history. A new baby, a new kingdom was about to be born, Israel. And the baby in chapter 12 is kind of talking about Jesus. In the Old Testament, my firstborn son was called out of Egypt. But before they could get through to freedom, water was there to try to stop them. They were caught between the armies of Pharaoh and the Red Sea. And the Red Sea was a threat to them, you see. And the devil uses water here in a vision to try to hurt them. And God shows that he can handle water this time just as sure as he could handle water back then. So the whole of chapter 12 is built on Old Testament background. Things like Elijah, who for 3.5 years of drought is told to go off into the wilderness, but is protected and fed, nourished there. This woman in chapter 12, verse 6, fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, that there they may nourish her for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years, see? So that's just that's just the thing that happened to Elijah, you see. And so all you have to do, and I'm not saying it's all simple. You understand what you need to do is become acquainted with Old Testament record and read in there, and you can see the Old Testament. It's all over the book of Revelation. You know that. So 10, 11, and 12 says, people, don't worry. And I'm telling you today that you're not to worry. You might say, yeah, but you don't know what I'm going through. No, I don't. I don't. But I know that my Lord does. And I'm saying to you that this wasn't written simply for the first century. This is for you and me. And we're told in all these texts, don't worry. Whoever your opponents are, Jesus says, I can handle them. Things will be all right. We as Christians people are not to be victims. We are not to be victims. I'll not let the world victimize me. I'll not be a victim. And if the Lord wants to bring some kind of sickness or disease or loneliness on me, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm telling you there are people that are doing it, and it can be done. And if the Lord wants to bring something on me like what these Christians are getting in the first century, we have to take it. And if it's loneliness or sickness or illness or disease or loss of loved one, and you see it coming and you want to lock the door and put the bars on the doors, I'm telling you that those things will rip the door off the hinges and come in as your boss and run and ruin your life. But if you hear a knock at the door and you look out and it's loneliness, and you think, I know why it's there. And you invite it in, not as your boss, but as your friend. All these 3 chapters, 10 through 12, are written for comfort, to comfort the brethren. And no matter what you're going through, Jesus is saying, I can handle it. You don't worry about it. I used to have a sign on my mirror back years ago, before I met this wonderful woman I have now for a wife. My first one decided that she needed a boyfriend, so I was like, I guess I'm not okay with that. So I went through a year of just torture, thinking, why in the world are you doing this to me, Lord? And I had, I forget what his name was, Richard Brando, counselor that was with the Christian Family Services. He gave me a lot of help. And one of the things he did that helped me the most, he says, I want you to put this on your mirror. When you get up in the morning, it says, good morning, Murray. Whatever your troubles are today, I can handle them. Don't worry about it. Love, God. And if you put that on your mirror every morning, that will change your life of all the problems that you have on this earth. These 3 chapters were written to the first century Christians to tell them, whatever is about to happen, don't you worry about it. I can handle it. I'll take care of it. That's about halfway through, isn't it? What time is it?
11:30.
About 11:30.
And the difference to figure this.
Where's the sign? 10 to 11:30. That's perfect. We're halfway through. So let's, I can smell the steak and lobster burning right now. So let's close at the end of chapter 12 and start back up with chapter 13. Buzz through the rest of it after we get done eating.
I have a few things to share real quick, and Mike has something to share too. Go ahead, Mike.
We have more than enough lunch, so if you sign up or didn't sign up for lunch, stay for lunch, we'll have lunch over you and everybody. So,
Okay.
easy.
Thank you. And I promise Terry and Sharon this will be brief, but there's a couple things that I felt like I had to share out of this teaching that I think a lot of you who are in the Church of Christ are going to be like, yeah, Derek, I get that. I know that. Why are you spending your time doing this? But I'm aware of some who are here who may not know and understand this, because I know I didn't know and understand this before. Murray said earlier that the kingdom is here. I spent a lot of my life looking far off, looking at the book of Revelation, looking at different teachings and stuff, thinking, I'm waiting someday for something good to come down. I'm leaving this to God. I'm leaving this to Him. One day He's going to come and He's going to restore the earth to
It's beauty to everything perfect, everything great, everything wonderful. And granted, that's him. That's his work, and one day he's going to do whatever he needs to do there. But the kingdom is here and the kingdom is present. And you understand that when you look at the Old Testament. When you look at what they worshiped then, the people didn't know God. Jesus wasn't king to them. They didn't fully get that and understand that. There was this tiny group of people that were being told, listen, give me your whole hearts and serve me and I will be your king. But they didn't get it. And they kept being drawn in by all the worldly idols all around them from all the pagan nations everywhere, and kept throwing in their hearts and their lives into that, and also intermingling it a little bit with what God is trying to tell them to do. And then they had this physical temple that they had to go to try to find God. We have him living in us now. He rules our hearts. He wasn't ruling the hearts of the people before. He wasn't living in them before. The Spirit came down in spurts before at different times, and now it is here. Whatever our love and our passion is for is our King. And so I would suggest to you, and I believe it with all of my heart, the kingdom is here because God came and said, listen, you guys didn't know how to hold fast to me before, but I came, I overcame the world, I overcame all the physical stuff that you had to do before to come and find me, and now I live in you, and I came to be the light of the world, and now that light is in you, that no matter what you go through, is what Murray just said, no matter what you go through and endure through in this life, you can get through it because I'm the preeminent one and I am in you. What more do we need from a king? He came to be that light of the world, and then he didn't just run away and say, okay, now you're stuck in darkness for a while, have fun, enjoy it, long after the day when everything's perfect and great again. No, he said, you go now be that city on the hill. You go and show how beautiful my kingship is, and it's here. The other thing I wanted to share about the 7 churches that I never really grasped and understood before, we have to understand, and we could look at the New Testament and see that Paul was called to go and preach to the Gentiles, right? The Jews kept rejecting God, rejecting Jesus, and Paul was told, go and bring this message to the Gentiles. So all the map he had of where all those churches were, if I remember right, was kind of in the Turkey area. Those are the areas that Paul and some of the disciples went to go and bring the gospel there. And these are people who were pagans. These are people who were a part of that idol worship and a part of that decadence, that immorality. And they threw their lives aside and their idol worship aside to grab a hold of God and this gospel and this truth. But then what was going to happen so soon after that was horrible, terrible times for them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine saying, okay, God, I believe, I love you, I believe, and I'm going to throw it all aside, throw this world aside, and then not long after, horrible persecution comes on you. So our Father, our Lord, said, I'm going to do everything that I can to encourage you guys so that you thrive during this, so that you understand and you don't regret the choice that you made. Because I need this gospel to go out. This gospel has to go out. This gospel's got to survive through everything you're about to experience. And it did. And that's something I never understood when reading about the 7 churches, understanding what they must have been going through after just recently, in a relatively short period of time, giving their hearts to God, and then all this horrible persecution comes down, on them. Okay, I'm done. I think I have a lot more to say. But lunchtime, there was one thing about lunch that I thought was important that I needed to say. Of course, there's a prayer. I wrote lunch in all caps to try to remind me, and now I can't remember what it was. All right, well, I'm sure it'll all work out. What's that, Mike? Yes, thank you. That's what I was going to say. He helped me out. So we're going to the old kitchen to get the food, right? Okay, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go to the old kitchen. It's down over there to the left, for those who don't know, to get our food, and then come back and eat in here. And I think the kids are even going to come join us as well. So let's go ahead and say a prayer on our food. Father in heaven, we thank you so very much for this time spent this morning. We thank you for the spirit that is here. We thank you for the tenderness that is here, the humility that is here, the word that is present, and for the people that are here that are eager to know more about you and to love you, so that we can be that city on a hill, so that we can be that changed people and live good lives that really allow your love to flow from us and feed the hearts of the people all around us. Father, we pray that you bless this food, that it nourishes and strengthens our bodies. We thank you so very much for the ladies that put in the time and the energy to prep this meal for us, and we pray that you continue to bless our time together this afternoon. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, let's do this again. We made it halfway through. If you remember when we closed, before we filled our bellies full, if I look out and see some of you with your eyes closed, I won't worry about it. I know that you're praying for me to get done. Okay, we put ourselves into a position, and put ourselves into John's position. He's incarcerated on the island of Patmos for his testimony and because he's a believer of Christ. Of course, he's one of the apostles too, the last one living. And so he's on the island of Patmos in a Roman jail, and something bad is about to begin. Eventually, John gets off the island of Patmos during the days of Vespasian. But before he left Patmos, he got this vision of what was going to happen. And John had already lived through the time of Nero, because Nero was the 5th Caesar, and Jesus was born in the time of Augustus, remember, the first Roman emperor. He was executed, crucified during the time of Tiberius, and 3 Caesars later, Nero, and Nero was the wacky one. Well, they were all kind of wacky, but Nero seemed to stand out. Nero did all kinds of things that we mentioned one last night, and we mentioned it again this morning. Nero imprisoned Christians because he was big into the plays and the amphitheaters. He always had to be the hero. And he would write plays, and he would have his assistants write plays. And if his assistants' plays were better than his, he would use them and then kill them for writing a better one than him. And he's the one that would kill his own family and his own wife. And there's all kinds of stories in history about how Nero was. But what he did to Christians also was is also written in history. In his plays, he would have Christians in prison, and in his plays, if it came time for a sword to be ran through somebody or a spear, he would close the curtains, bring the curtains back, and they would have a Christian dressed up as a stunt double. So he didn't have to do any stunt work. The Christian then was run through with the spear, and everyone would applaud. And so that was another thing he used Christians for, so that he wouldn't need stuntmen in plays. That was another one of Nero's good tricks. So when Nero dies, thank goodness if you're a Christian, right? Civil War breaks out. 3 emperors come up in quick succession. Only one or two of them was only 3 months, 4 months, and all 3 of them were less than 18 months. And for some reason in Daniel, he uproots 3. So he's left with 8. And why God had Daniel uproot 3? For one, we know they had no significance whatsoever in history. Matter of fact, some historians say that 2 of them reigned simultaneously for a little while Civil War was going on. You know, the Republicans wanted this guy and the Democrats wanted this guy. And so it was almost, the Roman Empire almost fell after Nero died from burning Rome because he wanted to rebuild it. Blamed the Christians for it. Of course, you know all that story. And so finally, in a time of peace, the Christians are thinking, thank goodness. But then John gets this vision of the book of Revelation, warning them, take heart, because it's going to rise again. Maybe that's why Daniel uprooted 3. So he's left with 8, because 11 didn't mean anything in apocalyptic speech. 8 meant in apocalyptic speech a resurrection. So John begins where Daniel leaves off when he talks about the Caesars. He has 8 because the number 8 is going to resurrect something. And we find out that he's going to resurrect a persecution on the church empire-wide. And so we came through all the chapters. We came through chapter 10 through 12, and it was kind of like a pep rally. Because it said it went through the warning judgments and the trumpets, and they wouldn't repent, remember? No matter what God did to try to warn them. Earthquakes, all kinds of famine, disease. You read through Roman history, they wouldn't repent. And then 10 through 12, he gave the Christians a pep rally for what was about to happen and built them all up. And in 13, then, he goes on to describe in 13 through 19. In 13 through chapter 19, we're going to find that John really jumped around with his visions. In chapter 16, he previews the Battle of Armageddon in a vision, but it's not described until chapter 19. And then in chapter 17, he's talking about the beast that the Christians are fighting against. It's like, well, we've been talking about that all along. Well, in chapter 17, he puts a chapter in there of visions. Of course, there wasn't chapters at the time. He was just writing down a whole entire long letter. In chapter 17 talks about the visions and who the battle is against. And it's pretty plain to see who it is if you know anything about history. And in chapter 18, he talks about how it's fallen and how the merchants of the earth, we'll see here in a minute, weep and mourn over. And it's like, well, yeah, but the Battle of Armageddon until 19. So he kind of moves in and out of these visions to describe things, but not in a chronological order as you would in some kind of story. In chapter 13, after our pep rally here, the Christians are introduced to a sea beast. He sees a beast coming up out of the sea. And what does this sea mean? The sea, if you think about a sea, if you've ever been on the ocean in a boat, how the sea is always in turmoil. You rarely ever see the sea like just glass, like when I'm out on the Pacific Ocean every once in a while. It's never just nice and smooth like Smithville Lake is in the evening. No way. The sea is always in turmoil. It's always foaming and frothing and waves crashing against each other. So this thing comes up out of the sea, and the sea is the nations of the earth, always crashing against each other. And we see this beast coming up out of it, having 10 horns and 7 heads, he says in 13, verse 1. And on his horns were 10 diadems, on his head blasphemous names. Now, if you stop right there to see, let's see who this sea beast is. This sea beast, we learned in chapter 17, sits on 7 hills. And it has 7 kings, and then an 8th one comes up. But it has, this 7-headed thing has 10 horns. So we go to chapter 17, and hold your finger on 13, and you see what the 10 horns mean. The 10 horns, he says in 17 verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have yet to receive a kingdom. But they receive authority of kings, as kings with the beast one eye. These have one purpose. They give their power and authority to the beast, to Rome. Now, if you think about it, who are these 10 horns that are on the 7 heads? They're kings. But wait a minute. I thought Caesar was king. Who are the 10 kings? They are the client kings of Rome. They're the kings who on their own don't have any power. But they give their authority to Rome, and Rome allows them to reign. We know of one of those kings. Herod, king of Judea. So when you read about the story of Jesus and King Herod, you think, wait a minute. Wasn't Jesus born during the Roman Empire? Augustus would have to be. It's like, oh, King Herod, king of Judea, but he had to give his authority to Rome. And that's why Pontius Pilate was there to make sure he did that. So the client kings, every time the Romans took over another country and another nation, they would leave the present government in, but they had to pay their homage and taxes and give their authority to Rome. And if the king of that nation that they conquered and took over wanted to do that, he got to remain king most of the time. And if he didn't want to do that, he wasn't able to, because they wouldn't give him an option. He either died when he was conquered, or he surrendered to Rome's deity. And so that's who the horns are, as you see in chapter 17. That's why he's got 10 horns on top of his 7 heads. They're the client kings of Rome, who on their own don't have any power. And verse 2 says, and the beast which you saw was like a leopard, a bear, and a lion. John is living in the time of the Roman Empire. And he's looking back towards what had been taught from Daniel. And tomorrow in our class, what I'd like to do is compare Daniel chapter 7 with Revelation chapter 13. And when you put them two together, it's really, really plain to see. And it's, to me, an exciting, but I'm a history lover anyway, but it's really exciting to put them 2 chapters together. Because in Daniel sees a lion, a bear, and a leopard. He's looking into the future. John is in the future, and Rome has already been established, and the Roman Empire is in existence. John looks back and sees them in the exact opposite order as Daniel does, because Daniel's looking forward. John looks back and sees them backwards from the way Daniel does. And that's kind of an ironic thing that a lot of people that study this in depth see. And remember when we mentioned, I saw one of the heads that had been slain, but its fatal wound was healed. And how we just mentioned that when Nero was gone and persecution stopped, how everybody saw it, it's like, shoo, glad that's over with. But then his fatal wound was healed, and number 8 brings it back up again. and the whole earth is amazed and follow after the beast. And they worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And one of the things we'll look at tomorrow from Daniel, verse 6, or verse 5, and there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. The authority to act for 42 months, which is 3.5 years, which is times and a half a time. So it's not a literal 3.5 years, not a literal 42 months, but you draw from what the 3.5 years means from Elijah's experience. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle. And we'll see from Daniel 7 tomorrow the same exact thing. How he's blaspheming the name. And all you got to do is go back in history and study a little bit about Caesar Domitian. How everybody had to call him God. And if you don't, you will be beheaded. And how he was, and of course how that was a problem for the Christians, of course, to call a Caesar a most holy God. And we see in verse 11, then, an earth beast. This one comes up out of the earth. The other one we sometimes call a sea beast because that's where it came up out of. Here we have an earth beast. It comes up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, so it looked innocent. But it spoke as a dragon. When he opened his mouth, he found out it wasn't. And so that's kind of hypocrisy there. It looked like a lamb, and it was innocent looking enough. All you have to do is say Caesar is Lord, and we'll let you go. How hard can that be? And so and it says he exercises all of his authority, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first beast. So this is false religion. And all you have to do is read through some Roman history and find that they had their own shrines, they had their own temples, they had their own consiliums, they had their own worship, they had their own empire worship, and they had their own emperor worship, if you read anything on the history of the Roman Empire. And so and he talks about who he is. We get an example of who he is in chapter 16. In chapter 16 and verse 13, it lets you know who this earth beast is. In 16:13, when you look ahead, it says, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, which is talking about the sea beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So the earth beast in 16 verse 13 gets called not only an earth beast, but he has another name. He's called the false prophet because he makes you worship falsely. And I think it's in 19 and 20, he's called that again. In verse 19, 20, and the beast was seized and the false prophet. So that lets you know who the earth beast is. It's false religion. And then you get to the end of chapter 13, and one of the most famous numbers on earth. I know all of you have tried to have your license plates changed to this, 666. Here is wisdom. We find out this sea beast and this earth beast, and he's saying, he calls him 666. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is of man, and the number is 666. God is saying, you see this empire, you see this kingdom who's saying, I am God. Worship me. He's saying, don't you dare. Don't you dare. Because number one, he's only human. Number two, he's evil. And since he's human, don't you dare worship him. And that's why all told 2-3 times in the book of Revelation, when John falls down to worship the angel says, don't you get up, don't you dare do that. If an angel of the Lord, if a highly exalted messenger of God is not to be worshipped, don't you worship any stupid emperor. he's saying here. Because number one, he's human. He's only human. And the number 6 most of us know in the apocalyptic speech is the number of man. 7 is God's number. 6 always falls short of it. 6 still falls short. 666 still falls short of 7. 666 still falls short of 7. No matter how many times you say the word 6, it's still not 7. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So man is categorized by 6 in apocalyptic speech. And he's labeled here as 666. He's human. Don't you worry a thing about it, God's telling him. So when we get to 14 then, we have the 144,000.
Hey, Murray, can I say something real quick? I just heard this the other day. Online, it was about how we're told that God is, or there's a song, of course, holy, 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 but I think it's even mentioned in Revelation, holy, holy, holy is what the angels sing. So 3 times God is holy. 3 times man is human here.
Yeah.
3 times God is holy.
No matter how many times you say it.
Yeah.
You could say holy, 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 and the
Right.
song would still be true.
Right.
But the 3 times, and there's 3 woes, and the 3, a lot of times whenever it's mentioned 3 times, it just emphasizes the importance of it. He could have just said, that's man's number, it's number 6.
Right.
But he says 666 to emphasize the total humanness of it. It's no matter how many times he says it. And the 144,000 were already mentioned in chapter 17. And I think we mentioned something about it last night. The 144,000 standing on Mount Zion. Of course, we know what Mount Zion is in Hebrews 12. It's the church. They're standing with Jesus. And he talks about them and peps them up again. And the 144,000 is just an apocalyptic number. Forget about the number 144000. Because specific numbers don't mean something. You draw from that number what the lesson is. The 144,000 just mean the people of God, which is the number 12 in apocalyptic speech. 12, multiplied by 12, and that's 144. But it's raised to the 1,000th degree. And the number 1,000, as we'll study when we get to chapter 20 here in a minute, the number 1,000 just means completeness. It's total and complete, the number 1,000. So it's raised to the 1,000th degree, saying all the people of God who have been purchased from the earth in verse 3. They sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures that no one could learn. Sang a new song. What happened when Moses and the Israelites got across the Red Sea and they saw all of Egypt, all of Pharaoh's army destroyed? They sang a new song, it says in Exodus 15:1. And so they're singing a new song here because of the victory that's coming and that they're about to be vindicated. And in 14, and in 14:9, you see the doom for the worshipers of the beast. And he goes on to talk about that. The smoke of their turmoil goes up forever and ever. And he's getting them ready for the final outpouring of the wrath of God. And verse 13 through 20 is the judgment of Christ in the earth. And 13 through 16, it's looked at from the Christian standpoint. And in verse 17 through 20, it's looked at from the ungodly man's standpoint, if you read them carefully. And in chapter 15, we get to, God is saying no more delay. Because he's getting ready to pour out the bowls. And if you realized in the judgment and the trumpets, how everything, as you read through there, he destroyed 1/3 of this, 1/3 of that. And each time he wasn't going to completely destroy the place if they would repent. He would destroy a third of this, they wouldn't repent. Destroy a third of that, they wouldn't repent. So since they wouldn't repent, when he finally says, no more delay, here comes the bowls. And the bowls are the full outpouring where nothing, not anything, he doesn't hold back anything from his judgment. Everything is destroyed under the bowls. All the seas are turned to blood. All the grass and the trees are burned. And it's not meant to be understood literally, of course. He's destroyed. If you read through the Old Testament, you see Edom and Sodom and Gomorrah completely got buried. But you see God judging nations in the Old Testament. And he destroys them by burning them up, but yet what he's meaning is judgment on them. And when he talks about the destruction of Edom back in Isaiah, where he destroys everything and burns up everything, and the pitch and the fire is going to burn forever and ever, but yet the jackals and all these animals are going to live there. It's like, well, how are they going to live there? In asbestos suits? It's like, no, that's not what he's apocalyptically describing. I'm going to tear up your world. And so he's not literally meaning a complete destruction of the face of the earth. He's saying, I'm going to tear down your kingdom and destroy it forever and ever. So he pours out the bowls in the false prophet from verse 13. It says it's the earth beast. And in verse 17, the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came from the temple and said, it is done. So God is finished. No more chances the Roman Empire gets. Been destroying his church for years and years, and he's finally going to nail the coffin shut. And he's given description, verse 19 and down through 21. He's given a description of destruction of their world, and all of these huge hailstones, 100 pounds each. Of course, the premillennial, the Hal Lindsey thing with the 100 pounds each was like, how did that kill people? I think it's one of them hit you in the head. But, of course, he says there were missiles and stuff like that. But all this destruction is talking about, it's in Isaiah 34, it's in Isaiah 13, it's in Zechariah 1, it's in Micah 1. It's how it's described in the Old Testament, how God would destroy a nation. So he's reminding them that he's fixing to do to Rome the same thing he did to all these nations that he went up against in the Old Testament. And we get to 17. We already studied a little bit about 17 last night, because that kind of gives us the proof. He sees in verse 3, carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And of course, this is the civil power, the 7 heads. Remember the civil power that meant Egypt, because of how it punished and how it punished God's people. And the harlot, when nations made alliances with one another, in the Old Testament, God called it harlotry. He called it fornication, because Israel was his wife. When they would make alliances with other nations, he called it harlotry. And so here we have a picture of a harlot, because Rome made alliances with all these nations all around them when they took them over. And so we have a harlot sitting on the 7-headed beast. And she's clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones. And in verse 6, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. So there you have a saint persecutor. She persecuted the saints in the first century. And then we read on, and we studied the beast that was, is not, and all that, telling you kind of when it was persecuting, when it's not, and then when it's going to come up again. And in verse 9 he says, "Here is the mind which has wisdom." Now that should perk our ears up a little bit. Because what does that statement mean? Every once in a while the angel says, "Let me make your mind wise on this vision." I wish he would have said that after every single verse. Wouldn't that have been nice? Because on this verse he says, "Let me tell you what this one is." So, and what he says, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. And he goes on to describe them. Now, what a lot of the commentaries I've read is, they've went on and said, well, kings in the Old Testament often meant kingdoms. It's like, yeah, that's true. That's really true in some of Daniel. King, when he would say 4 kings are going to arise, and what he meant was Babylon, Medo-Persians, Greeks, and the Romans. And yeah, if you take the 4 kingdoms, and there's said in apocalyptic speech that out of this arise 4 kings, and you interpret that, it means 4 kingdoms. But if the angel says this is what it means, they are kings, that puts a period at it. You can't, if he says there are 7 kings, you can't write a whole commentary on how these kings mean Egypt, Medo-Persia, Babylon, Medo-Persia. It's like, no, he said there's 7 kings. This is your interpretation. Don't reinterpret the interpretation. So when he says there are 7 kings, that's what he means. Otherwise, he would have said these are 7 nations or 7 kingdoms. So these are 7 kings, literally, because he's given them an interpretation. He's making his mind wise on this vision. And we've already studied that. It sits on 7 hills. Verse 6, it persecutes the saints. In verse 18, and the woman which you saw is present tense. Not past tense, not future tense. In John's day, is present tense. The great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Persecutes the saints, sits on 7 hills, and in John's day ruled the world. That's Rome. That's all I can get out of that. So anyway, he goes on to talk about and describe that to them all the way through chapter 17, because they're waging war against the Lamb. And in chapter 18, a very popular view in chapter 18 is that it talks about perverted religion. And 3/4 of the commentaries I've read. It talks about perverted religion, they call it. If you read chapter 18, you can get perverted religion out of there if you had to. What it's talking about is a huge commercial power. And the huge commercial power is falling. And the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her wept and lamented over her because they could see her burning, standing at a distance because of fear of her torment. Woe, the great city Babylon. And in verse 11 of 18, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stone, pearls, fine linen, all that sort of stuff. Just imagine if Rome falls. Rome is the center of the earth. Where's all the commerce? It's coming in and out of Rome from all over the Roman Empire. When Rome falls, commerce is doomed. The merchants of the earth. And down in verse, even it talked about the ship captains setting afar because their ships were loaded, and Rome falls and they see it burning and they weep and mourn because their ships are loaded and now it's worth nothing. Just imagine if the U.S. fell. How much weeping would you hear from China and Japan, Thailand, Korea? This whole earth would weep and mourn commercially if this nation falls completely. It's the same thing that happened in the day of the Roman Empire. All these merchants are weeping and mourning over her because she's fallen. And that's what chapter 18 is as a whole. And we see in 19, in chapter 16, we got a preview of the Battle of Armageddon. And in chapter 19, Armageddon is described. In chapter 19, we see the beast seized. And in chapter 19, the first thing they want to do, the first thing God does, is this city is falling. So how does he want to describe the celebration? He says, let's have us a wedding feast. Because what does a wedding feast mean? To us, it means a 30-minute ceremony and a couple hours of eating cake and ice cream, right? But to the Jews, it meant a whole week-long celebration. And that's what it meant. It was a time to celebrate. I haven't been to very many weddings that wasn't a joyous occasion and a celebration. And if you ever do go to one that's not that, you probably want to leave. That's what when he says, how does he describe what we should do with the fall of this city, how it's going down in flames and we're watching it. Let's celebrate. And how does he describe that? Let's have us a wedding feast. Because that's a joyous time. That's a special occasion. And so he describes a wedding feast. And he describes it as, for the marriage of the Lamb has come and his bride has made herself ready. And a lot of people will look at that and say, well, if the church was established on the day of Pentecost and this is in this house, it's like, nah. It's a description of a joyous occasion. It's not talking about a literal chronological coming in right now time. It's talking about let's be joyous. The city's fallen. And in the Battle of Armageddon, the final burial of it, he describes in chapter 19. At the end of chapter 19, the dragon is defeated and the two beasts. That's 19 verse 21. And the two beasts are thrown directly into the fire. Now the fire is a picture. And they're thrown into it, that lake of fire, those two beasts. But the devil, you'll notice, isn't thrown into the lake of fire in our vision. Now Rome has been defeated. It's gone down in blood and smoke. It's gone down in fire in our picture of it here. And then the devil then in chapter 20, verse 1 through 3, is bound up tight, dropped in a hole with no bottom. There's a lid put on it, and it's all sealed up. I was wanting to mention one more thing about that battle. Yeah, the white horse. And I had the two verses. I saw heaven open, behold, a white horse. Verse 11 of chapter 19. And he who sat upon it was called Faithful and True. And this is the battle here fixing to be with the final battle with Rome. And the righteous, he judges and wages war. And his eyes are a flame of fire, kind of like the guy we've seen in chapter 1. Upon his head are many diadems, and his name is written upon which no one knows except himself, because he is like nobody else. His name is his character. Clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. We know what that is. That's Jesus. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. That's us. That's Christians. We're in this battle with Jesus. He's the captain, we're the followers. But notice, and when the battle begins, in verse 19, you have this big white horse, and you have all these white horses following him. I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assemble and make war against him that sat upon the horse and against his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who performed the signs in his presence, which he deceived with those who received the mark, worshipped his image. They were thrown alive in a lake of fire. And the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat upon the horse. And all the birds were filled with their flesh. Now notice this battle. You have the dude on the white horse leading this army, and all of his followers on white horses coming with him. But in verse 21, they were all killed by the sword that came from the mouth of the one on the white horse. All we have to do is go to battle with Jesus, and he will fight the war. Notice that the followers on white horses didn't have to lift a finger, because they were all killed by the sword that came from the mouth of him who sat upon the horse. And nothing is mentioned about what they had to do. They just had to follow. And so I think that's kind of a significant thing that we could probably make a sermon out of, you know. Bill.
Well, I used to think this too, but this where most of the people think this is the judgment that is coming.
Oh yeah, they think this is the end of time battle of Armageddon. And what the battle of Armageddon really is, go ahead, John.
Isn't there some historical significance?
Yeah, what the battle of Armageddon is.
Yeah.
And
The
the Valley of Megiddo,
Yeah.
all through the Old Testament, everybody who fought there, Egyptians, everybody who fought there, Israelites, no matter who it was who fought there, the side that won was always the side that God was on. Isn't that amazing? The side that God wanted to win was always the winner. And there was sometimes when the side that you wouldn't think was supposed to win would win. Because the guys who were supposed to be the good guys but were following after idols and stuff would go to battle, who God used to be on their side, and he would send this army from Egypt down there and just annihilate them in the Valley of Megiddo. So it wasn't always the people that he predicted to win. It was the side that God said was going to win. And he used that. They used that valley all through the Old Testament, and my dad's even visited that valley. It's just miles and miles and miles and vast wide. And even Napoleon fought there. And when Napoleon says he saw it from a high mountain and says that this is the greatest place to fight a battle that there ever was, just because of its vastness of how wide it is and kind of bowl-shaped on both sides. So when you went down in there, it was time to do business. And the Valley of Megiddo, the Battle of Armageddon, is just all through the Old Testament. And all it meant was God's side's going to win. Because it did that every single time in the Old Testament. So it's just a vision John is getting here. It's not talking about a future battle that's going to be fought there in the future. It's John getting a vision saying when Rome and Christ come together to fight this battle, because Christ says, enough of you doing this to my followers. He visions it as the battle in the Valley of Megiddo, Battle of Armageddon.
Murray, as you brought out several times about the apocalyptic speech, okay, that's what it says. What does it mean?
Right.
If this is a literal battle, which that's what the world interprets it as,
Right.
then we have to interpret it as, okay, who's going to fight it? 3 unclean frogs.
Right. You could probably get that on pay-per-view.
Yeah, that don't make sense.
John.
Well, today you might say that somebody met their Waterloo,
Yeah,
which is the equivalent of Napoleon, because we know from history that's where,
right, it's a figure of
that was
speech.
him. So Battle of Armageddon is
It was a
using
figure of
historical
speech,
thing as
right,
a figure of speech.
right. So I think you're getting the idea. Okay, so at the end of 19 then, dragon's defeated. The two beasts thrown directly into the fire. Rome has been defeated and it's gone down in blood and smoke and flames. The picture of it. The devil then, in chapter 20, verse 1 through 3, it's only 120. The devil then, in chapters 1 through 3, is bound up tight, dropped in a hole with no bottom. And there's a lid put on it, and it's all sealed up. Now, I'm going to lose some of you here. What does that talk about in 1 through 3 when he's dropped in there and it's all sealed up? It talks about the same thing as the 1,000-year rule is talking about, only the opposite side of the coin. The binding of the devil for 1,000 years says, with regard to Rome, keep that in your mind. This whole book is a battle between Christians and the Roman Empire. So keep that in your mind. With regard to Rome, using Rome against the Church of God in that regard, the devil wasn't only slowed up, he wasn't just caused to stumble, he has the fire beaten out of him. The 1,000-year binding was not a slowing up. You read the text for yourself. He's not slowed up. He has his head knocked off. He's defeated. So he's in this hole and all sealed up for 1,000 years. And the other side of the coin is the 1,000-year rule. Now, as we go through this, take the number 1,000 and a calendar that says 1,000 year. Take them completely out of your head. Okay? Good. Now we've done that. It says that the brethren, what's the 1,000-year rule? It says that the brethren are totally, completely victorious over the devil in this matter. What's the 1,000-year binding say? It's a total, utter, absolute defeat of the devil in regard to this venture of using Rome against the church. What's the 1,000-year rule say? That the brethren are altogether, totally, completely victorious over the devil in this matter with using Rome to annihilate it. In Psalms 50, verse 10, Psalms 105, verse 8, 1 Chronicles 16, 15, get those texts down, go through them in your Bible on it. The 1,000 indicates perfectness and completeness. He says in Deuteronomy 7:9, I show my mercy to 1,000 generations. What does that say? I'm completely merciful. Psalms 50:10, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. What about that cow standing over there on hill 1001? He says, I'm in complete ownership. Psalms 105, verse 8. I have commended my statutes to 1,000 generations. What about generation 1001? Well, they're in there too. But he just stops at 1,000 and uses that as an apocalyptic figure of speech number. And each time you read that, he's talking about completeness. There is no reservation in the matter. It's total and complete. The devil is utterly bound. He tried with Rome to kill the church. He's whipped and utterly and completely whipped. And the brethren are utterly and completely victorious. But John says he'll have a try again, though. Someday, somewhere, he'll have another go. That's the little season. That's the little season. But it won't be with Rome. And it's been 2,000 years. and Roman Empire still hasn't been revived. So when he says he's utterly whipped in that, completely, totally, that means forever. The Roman Empire will never persecute the church again, ever. Because the devil was totally whipped in that regard. Now there's a first resurrection mentioned in here. There's a first resurrection. He mentioned the first one to make it distinct from the second resurrection, which is in chapter 20. There are two resurrections in chapter 20, two of them. In the vision, and mark this down, in the vision, get this in your head, in the vision, they're separated by 1,000 years. Neither two of them are literal resurrections. Neither of them are literal resurrections. Now, I know we're fond of making the first one figurative and the second one literal. But people, that's where we get into trouble, you see. There are two resurrections in the text in his vision. The first one deals only with the saints. Picture this in your mind. John sees the battle of Armageddon. He sees the people dying all over the show. He sees some fall dead with the mark of the beast on them. And he sees some fall dead with the name of the Father on them. Now it's in a vision, you understand. It's teaching lessons. He sees the battle with Rome, its ungodliness, and all of its carnal warfare he's seeing in a vision. He sees people dying all over the show. He sees some lying dead with the mark of the beast on them, and some lying dead with the name of the Father on them. But it's in a vision, but not in literal truth. He's seeing in a vision the number of the dead come to life in his dream. Which ones are they? They are the ones who wear the mark of the Father on them. And if you notice very carefully in verse 4, I saw thrones and they sat on them. And there was judgment given to them. That's one group. Then he sees the souls of them that were beheaded for the testimony of Christ. That's the second group in the first resurrection. The first group are the brethren who didn't die, who lived through the persecution with Rome. The second group are those who died, who were beheaded for the testimony of Christ. They're the ones who died. He wants you and me to know it's not only the people who lived in Christ through these trying times that are victorious, even the ones who died are victorious. How does he show that then? Even the dead men are victorious. He pictures in a vision a resurrection. Somebody argued that there's no resurrection in the text. You look again. You look again, verse 4. I saw thrones and judgment was given to them, and they sat upon them. Notice this carefully. I saw the souls of them. Souls is not the subject of the sentence. Them is the subject of the sentence. He said, I saw the souls of the people. And I saw the souls of them who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus, for the word of God, that didn't worship the beast, wouldn't wear his mark. And what happened? And they lived. This they. Who's this they? He said, I saw the souls of those who died for Christ. And I saw them come to life. He doesn't say he saw the souls come to life. Souls don't die. That'd be a safe thing for him to say. No. He sees a resurrection. It's a vision he sees. Now what's he saying? He's saying, gentlemen, I want you to understand this. That not only them that died, that lived their life out in, not only them that lived their life out in peace, faithful before God in the face of Roman pressure, not only are they victorious, even those who have died in Roman persecution, they are victorious also. How does he tell us that truth? He sees thrones sitting and brethren getting on them. Then he sees the people who had died for Christ at the battlefield. He sees a resurrection in the vision. And they get up and they sit on thrones. And they're all wearing their crowns and they're acting as priests for Jesus Christ. That's the first resurrection. And so in the vision you get the victory. Everyone who lived and died are victors. Why? Because they're all sitting on thrones, whether they're dead or alive. In the vision, they're sitting on thrones reigning for 1,000 years. That's the victors. Now in this corner, you know how when you watch a boxing match and it's all over and this guy beat this guy half to death, and you know they don't say a whole lot about this guy because he lost, but in this corner they say all kinds of stuff and build him up. And then that's kind of what John's doing. In this corner of the first resurrection, here's the winners, and in this corner, these poor guys. And so that's kind of what he's doing here. How about the rest of those dead? In a vision now, in a vision, what about the rest of the dead? They don't live again until the 1,000 years is finished. Why does he say that? Because they are not allowed to live during that 1,000-year rule. That's a token of victory. And they're not victorious. If they lived during that period, they would be the victors. But they're not the victors, so they're not allowed to live during that 1,000 years. And remember, don't think 1,000 years is 1,000 years. Throw away your calendar, remember? They stayed dead for 1,000 years. Those who belong to Christ participate in the first resurrection in John's vision. It's a resurrection to 1,000-year ruling, as described as this was the winners. The rest of the dead, the ungodly dead in our picture in Rome, they stay dead for 1,000 years. But then they come to life. And you see, that's where the millennialists get the two resurrections 1,000 years apart. He takes the first resurrection literally, and he takes the second resurrection literally, and they're 1,000 years apart. But what have we done? And then, I don't mean to be mean, but what have we done? We've taken the first one figuratively, and we've taken the second one literally and say to him, hey, be consistent. Well, we got to be consistent too, right? So, anyway, there in chapter 20, there are two resurrections. One comes at the beginning of the 1,000 years. That's only for the saints in our picture. It speaks of victory of the saints over Rome. But what about the state of those who died for the devil? What's their destiny? What's their hope? There is no hope for them. They only live again in our picture, in John's vision. They only live again, mind you, to do what? To die again. The saints die with hope. These fellows die without hope. How does he describe their hopeless condition? He describes it as he's describing the losers as 1,000-year death, and then a resurrection in 11 through 15 to a second dying. Boy, that's hopeless. If that's all we were going to be raised for so we could die again, wouldn't that be pretty hopeless? Now I can understand, I do understand honestly, if you hold chapters 20, 11 through 15 is yet to come, and that's the future judgment. I understand that if that's what you hold. There is going to be a judgment day. There is going to be a resurrection day. The Bible teaches it in a number of places. But this text in Revelation 20 is not the place to go to establish that. Notice what we've done. We've figurized all the way along. We've figurized chapter 19. We've figurized chapter 21 through 6. We've figurized chapter 27 through 10. And then all of a sudden we literalize 4 or 5 verses, 11 through 15. And then we go to chapter 21 and we figurize again. In chapter 21, and I think tomorrow when I want to go back to Daniel, so you'll get a better vision of what the final judgment there is. That final judgment of Rome falling and burning is mentioned in Daniel's vision of Rome falling falling and burning. So all you have to do is find, hey, this judgment's in Daniel. And it wasn't talking about the end of time in Daniel. And now John is seeing what Daniel saw. So it's not talking about the end of time by John either. Chapter 21, there's a new heaven and a new earth. What is that? In the Old Testament, the language of judgment. The language of judgment was the dismantling of the ungodly man's heaven, the tearing up of his properties, the pouring fire upon his areas and burning it all up, the dismantling of his world. That's the apocalyptic description of judgment. Bill, go ahead.
Don't we have to keep in mind, though, this is all supposed to happen near?
Yeah, also.
Yeah.
These are things which must shortly take place.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that takes, gets rid of the future judgment.
Right. Yeah, we'll look at that tomorrow when we, in our class tomorrow, I want to kind of tie some stuff in Daniel in this. And it's real entertaining to me, so hopefully it is to you too. And so the dismantling, so back to 21, now we're in 21. And the dismantling of a man's world is the language of judgment. So what then is the language of blessing? It's a language of judgment. Is ripping the ungodly man's world up. What's the language of blessing? Bringing in a new one. John's not saying that there's going to come a literal heaven and earth, new heaven, new earth. That term was used all over Isaiah whenever Israel was going to come out of some kind of... It's used in Isaiah... Oh, I didn't write it down. Good grief. It's in there somewhere. Just read the book of Isaiah. You'll see it 2 or 3 times.
69, 66.
Isaiah 65. Did I put it up there? Okay. It was always used of bringing in a new blessing. It was called a new heaven and a new earth. When Israel would be rebuilt because it fell, and of course it fell because of ungodliness, it repented, and then whenever it would come back up and be described in Isaiah 65, a new heaven and a new earth. It wasn't a new heaven and a new earth. This earth didn't vanish and a new one pop up when Israel was rebuilt. It's still the same earth, literally. But figuratively, it's described as a new heaven and a new earth. So he's saying with the destruction of the ungodly world and the ungodliness, it's going to be a different world to live in. The oppressor is dead. The sea is no more, it says in there. And that's not talking about the Mediterranean Sea. It's talking about that sea where the beasts come up from. That sea's gone. The sea would be a spooky thing for them, you see, where that gargantua came from. He's assuring them that thing won't come up again. Now we've held that chapter 21 speaks of eternity. And a lot of people say that, and it might do that, you see. But it sure don't look that way to me. Now read for yourself and see if you don't agree. In verse 21 and verse 9 and following, after this battle, Rome is gone. It fell. It's burnt. It's never came back. It's been 18,000 years and it still hasn't come back. And now all you have left standing is the winner. And so now let's talk about him for a while. In chapter 21, verse 9 and following, he wants to show him, verse 9, last phrase, he wants to show him the bride, the wife of the Lamb. What does he want to show him? The bride, the wife of the Lamb. What's that?
The church.
That's the church. You know that, and I know it. How does he describe it? Look at verse 10. He wants to show me something. So he carries me away in the Spirit to show me the wife of the Lamb. He carries me away in the Spirit to a high mountain, shows me the holy city, Jerusalem. What is that? That's the church of God. Of course it is. Hebrews 12. And how does he describe it? A city 4 square. Remember, we're talking about the church. He's showing it to me. And that's all he's talking about all the way through chapter 21. He's not describing heaven. What does he say he's describing? The glorious state of the church. That's what he's describing. You know he borrows all this from Isaiah? He's borrowing all this from Isaiah 54. So what happened? When the enemy comes against the church of God and really starts to work their case, when the smoke clears and it's all over, what do we see? We see a bride adorned for her husband, chapter 21, verse 2. She's not all blood-stained, battered, and beaten. Oh no, she looks so good and she's pure. When the city's attacked and trampled under and the smoke clears, what do we see? Instead of a broken down old city, we see a city described just like this. And he borrows all of it from Isaiah. It's not heaven. I don't mean to upset you either. You understand, but you're big enough and grown enough to listen to this. And if you don't like it, dump it. I don't care. Anyway, do what you think you ought to in the light of the scripture. So I want you to notice this, though. In his description, he says the city sits and gives light. But it gives light to whom? Notice that it gives light in verse 24. It gives light to the nations that walk amidst the light of the kings of the earth. And the kings of the earth bring their glory into it. Where? In heaven? In eternity? Where's all these nations and kings coming from? And this is talking about heaven. Well, heaven's only supposed to have one king, one nation. This isn't talking about eternity at all. He's saying that the church of God, when all this trouble is over, the nations will still be taught by her. And if they want light, they'll walk in her light, or they'll walk in nobody's light. And then in chapter 22, verse 2, and in the midst of the street, and on either side of the river of life, and you know that the river of life is not restricted to eternity. We drink of that today. In 22, verse 2, and in the midst of the street thereof, and on either side of the rivers, the tree of life bearing 12 manners of fruit. 12 manners of fruit, that 12 is God's people, and it does that every month. It's 12 times a year. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There's no way you can put that in eternity. Just no way. First of all, there's not going to be this nice little sort of arrangement. Number 2, nobody's going to be sick there. And if anybody is sick there, there's no doubt about it, the leaves of the tree of life is not going to heal them. It's too late then. No, that's not the point at all. What's he saying? He's saying, brethren, the church of God is going to come through hard times and trials. But when it's all over and it's through, she'll be like a bride, spotless and pure. She'll be like a city that everyone will acknowledge. She really does bear truth. For what happened? There was another huge city that said, we're the people. And that moron Domitian stomped around there telling everybody to call him God. But when the smoke cleared, what do we have? It's all over. Who's left standing? We have one super beautiful city and one super beautiful girl. Now the truths that were true for those days are true for your days and mine. Here's my last oral paragraph. What was the point of the whole book of Revelation? The church of God were to be oppressed by Rome. They would persecute, beginning with our friend Domitian, for 2.5 centuries, burned and raped and plundered and hurt, and everybody would worry that they didn't get comfort. The Lord God writes a funeral song for Rome, the Rock of the Ages, in Revelation. And he says, hang loose and stay cool, for I rule the world, and I love you. And people, I want you to know this, that Jesus Christ loves you and me incredibly. That he's not someone who loves and is weak. He's someone who's capable of taking care of all of our problems. And if the church can contend against the hugest, mightiest, powerfulest, barbaric empire that ever was on the face of the earth, why are we worried about ISIS? Why are we worried about Al-Qaeda? Why are we worried? We're the church, man. We're the people. It's not our problem. Our job is to preach the word. God will fight that battle. If he can beat Rome, he can beat anything on this earth that we've come up against. I want to thank you for your time. Did I miss something? Oh, yeah. I was going to, what Bill was saying a while ago, at the very end of the chapter, after, I know from growing up all these years, singing all the songs like Derek was talking about a while ago, the streets of gold in heaven, and I can't wait to get heaven and walk on the streets of gold and all this kind of stuff. It's like, where did they get that? From Revelation chapter 21. And then after I studied Revelation chapter 21, it's not talking about heaven at all. Heaven was described in Revelation chapter 4. Remember, the door opened heaven, I went in. There wasn't any streets of gold, it was a throne room. But people that haven't studied it out have written our songs, and they're in our songbooks, and sometimes the reason I have a hard time singing some of them is because they were written not on purpose, in ignorance of what the word really meant. And if our singing is supposed to be to teach and admonish one another, I have a problem singing in ignorance. That's why you mentioned that a while ago. Because the streets of heaven never is described as heaven streets of gold. Sorry. It's the church, the bride, the wife of the Lamb, he describes as heaven streets of gold. This is what, when God is sitting in heaven and looks down on earth and sees his kingdom, we think, well, look at us as a church. We argue a lot. We're having a problem. We fight over what color the carpet's got to be. And we have to get over all that, because when God looks down on us, he sees a city described just like this. He thinks we're so valuable and precious that our streets are made of gold. That we have nothing but jade and stones and sardis. When he sees us, when he looks at his church down on earth, he sees a city described just like this. It's pure. We have to live up to that. John.
And then there's the pearly gates.
Oh yeah, the pearly gates even. They're mentioned on there.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's... Okay, let's finish out with this last slide, because we talked about this last night, because it was so important to have a time frame. Because if you have a time frame, you know what period of time you got to study. Just like when I told you about the article that Jim McGuigan wrote, and it was about the two fighters, and it was about Russia, and then he turned it around, and it was October Weekly, 1857. It's like, wow. Now we got to put it into another kind of perspective then, if it's that 150 years ago. And so the time frame John has, he says in chapter 22, when he's done with the visions, in verse 7, he kind of ends in verse 6 of 22, and he said to me, these words are faithful and true, and the Lord of God of the spirits of the prophets sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must shortly take place. He mentions that as he's closing. In verse 7 he says, behold, I am coming quickly. That's 2,000 years ago. Then he says again in verse 10, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. That was 2,000 years ago. Then he says again in verse 12, behold, I am coming quickly. That was 2,000 years ago. Then he says again at the end of the book, the second to the last verse, and he testifies to these things saying, yes, I am coming quickly. That's 2,000 years ago. So that's why we have to study the book a little bit differently. Well, that's 2,000 years ago, and he said he was coming quick. So let's study some history to see what he was talking about all through the book of Revelation. Let's put our minds, it's written to the 7 churches of Asia. It's not written to us. We're not in the 7 churches of Asia. It's written for us. It was written to them. So let's apply it to them and get the message for us that we can get out of that. Mike?
I think it's interesting too that, when you're talking about this describing the church, then right after he describes all the church, in verse 17 there, he gives an invitation.
In 22:17? Yeah.
It's an invitation.
And the Spirit and the bride says, come. Let anyone who hears say, come. And let the one who is thirsty come. Lots of invitations right there. Hey, that's a good point. That's why we have an invitation song every Sunday morning. Anyway, that's pretty much that pretty much closes out the book for you to get your mindset on a period of time when you study it. And that gets us through the end of the chapter. That got us through a whole bunch of stuff. And I thank you for your attention. Tomorrow during class, I would kind of like to compare 1 or 2 chapters of Daniel with the Revelation so you can kind of put more stuff in the... Because in Daniel, you know that he's talking about the Roman Empire. Because he even cheats and says, this empire is you, Babylon. This empire is the one after you, Medo-Persians. And this empire is the one that comes after that, the Greeks. He even cheats and tells them, and this 4th beast is the one that comes after them. And then he goes through all this stuff that we see in Revelation. It's like, well, who is that? We're living in 2015. We know who that is. We have history books. We have Google. I have World Book encyclopedias at my house. I could even pull one of them ancient things down, and it'll tell me who the kingdom was that came after the Greek Empire. So and then we know from history, of course, especially all the history I've read, what the Roman Empire did to our brethren. And when I die one of these days and I get to go to heaven and I see Jesus' face, one of the things I want to do, if after I've looked at his face for about 3,000 years, I want to go around and shake the hands of those people who were sawed in two, and those people who were used as lights, and ones who were fed to lions for entertainment purposes. Because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be sitting in this room right now. And that's the book of Revelation. Thank you for your attention. Sorry I couldn't say more, but it was fun.
You will. You'll have more tomorrow, because I'm sure there will be questions.
I had 8 minutes.
Now it's my 8 minutes. Sorry, guys. No. Just a few things to share, kind of pull this together too. I think it's very important for us to understand, and Murray said it very well there at the end, that Christianity exists today. The word we have and know today, and the light that has gone out into all the world now for 2,000 years, is due to this battle that went on back then. Satan wanted to do everything he possibly could to keep Christianity from spreading right after Christ came and brought it to the world. And when you see it that way, when you look at that timeline, you understand Christ came and he brought meaning. He brought truth. He brought salvation. If any of you in this room, and I assume all of you, have walked an old life and then walked a new, Satan wanted you to stay in that old. He wanted you to experience nothing more than that old and that ugliness and that misery and that no hope. But Christ came and offered something new and brighter and better. And here we are 2,000 years later still knowing that because of this battle. And I thought about this when Murray was talking about the new heaven and the new earth, and about the old, the judgment, the destruction. We can see kind of metaphorically that in our own lives, right? Are you the same person you used to be? I know the old me. I don't want to go into in depth here, but my bride. The old her, and I didn't know her for a long time, the old her. And the new her, you couldn't recognize the two, you couldn't possibly compare the two and find any similarities. That's newness, that's beauty, and never to return back to the old. And how is she, how are we blessing others by being this new person in Christ, by being the city on the hill that we're supposed to be? One of the things that I got out of understanding this, thinking about the tree of life being for the healing of the nations, is, I don't know how to explain this very well, but I think in the past when I thought that this was all future stuff, that this was all something that was going to happen one day, new heaven, new earth, here, and looking afar off, I kind of put this is in Derek's mind, I'm not saying everybody does, but the responsibility on God. The responsibility is on God and on Jesus to come and fix this dark world. And it allowed me to sit back and look and wait and hope, and get really sad and upset and depressed when it wasn't happening when I wanted it to happen. Look at this world, Lord, why aren't you here yet? Why haven't you fixed and corrected that yet? But when I read it this different way, the responsibility's back on me. We, the light of the world, with Jesus living inside of us, we are supposed to be for the healing of the nations. We are supposed to be living for him and offering this hope and this salvation that he brought 2,000 years ago today. And all of a sudden your world changes, at least for me, this is my testimony in understanding this. My world changed from, let me sit back and see what God's going to do, to no, the possibilities are limitless for what we can do with God as our victor living inside of us right now. And offering that and showing that to a world that very, very much needs it and is desperate for it. One of the reasons why I stay on Facebook is because I can see constantly all over the need. The need is there in these different people's lives, and the reason why I stay connected to some of these different people, and even though I don't like some of the posts, and granted I haven't been able to handle all of it, but it's so very apparent that the need is still there, and he's the answer, but we're the answer, right? Because we're his hands and feet. It's not going to go out without us. And it opens your world when you start thinking that way. And it really makes you feel this tremendous responsibility to really live for Christ. With that being said, why don't we close with the singing of Days of Elijah, and then we will have a prayer. Oh, and let me say, for those who maybe don't know, tomorrow morning we have church service at 9 o'clock. And the services are unpredictable because of the invitation at the end. We don't know if we will get down here right at 10:30 or not. So if anyone's just coming to class, first of all, we invite you to worship. But if you aren't able to make it to worship and you're just coming to class, if you come in this room at 10:30 and no one's here, it's because we're still upstairs. And we'll be down as quickly as we can. And we'll try to start at 10:30 and have Murray finish up for us and do Q&A. All right, Days of Elijah. These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And though these are days of great trials, of famine and darkness and sword, still we are the voice in the desert, crying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. that too high, I'm sorry. And these are the days of Ezekiel, the dry bones becoming as flesh. And these are the days of your servant David, rebuilding a temple of praise. And these are the days of the harvest. The fields are as white in the world, and we are the laborers in your vineyard, declaring the word of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun, and the trumpet calls, so lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion's hill salvation comes. Oh, you bow with me? Father in heaven, thank you, my King, our King, for giving us this opportunity to really grasp all of what your truth and your word means. It's one thing, Father, to read this stuff and try to know it and try to be able to say to others, hey, I get this, you don't, but I get this. And it's a completely, entirely different thing to grasp it, to taste it, and to have it change us. And so we're thankful because we can see in the heart of Murray that that is his intention the whole time. He wants it to change us. You want it to change us. You want it to affect everything that we do while we're here on this earth. You want us to shine your light, and it is a huge and daunting task, but Father, we know you are that white horse with the sword leading in front of us, and that all we have to do is follow, and you've got the rest. And so, Father, help us as we attempt continually in our coming days to follow, but to follow feeling that we have the victor in front of us, knowing that we have nothing to fear, nothing to hold back our testimony, nothing to make us shy away from living the lives that we need to live, because you're out in front fighting for us, and you're out in front showing the way that it really ought to be, and that there's nothing that we should be ashamed of in our Christianity and in our love for you. But lead us, Father. Bless us the rest of the day, I pray. Thank you so much for Brother Murray and for the way that you have enlightened him over all the years, all those years spent in study, Father, to be poured out on us. We're very thankful for those moments that you spent with him, enlightening him, teaching him, showing him, correcting him, all of that so that we could experience this time today. Lead us from here, and we look forward to tomorrow as we wrap this up. In Jesus' name.